Hey all, welcome to the Skeptic Hangout, the place where we sit back, relax, and chit chat about intriguing and sometimes controversial topics through the lens of skepticism. With us today is Richard Gilliver from the Skeptic Takeout, Laura McGee from Unapologetically Me, and Richard Gill from the Yorkshire Atheist. Today, we're going to be talking about cryptozoology. So grab your English tea or your raspberry white mocha, hit that like and subscribe button, and join us as we share our thoughts on the whole spectrum of the animal kingdom that has been thus far rather elusive. This
Yeah,
is...
sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I just interrupted before.
Don't interrupt and then back out.
I know. Now I'm curious. This is episode. This is episode.
What episode
29,
is it?
Cryptozoology.
No, I jumped in. I didn't mean to jump in. I do apologize to our listeners and viewers, and Laura, of course. But I jumped in to say that I really wanted my good friend Bree McCune on here because she has some great videos on cryptozoology. But I've just been so busy that I haven't had time to ask her.
Okay, so one, we should have rescheduled this episode and not done it. So maybe we'll have to do it again. We'll do it again. We'll do a cryptozoology part 2. Duh. 2, you send me her link and I'll put it in the description and we'll encourage people to go check out her stuff.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, cool. We'll get some promotion in, even if I am a complete fuckwit and forgot to ask.
I know. So if you're listening, yeah, your buddy just let you down, but we want you on a future episode.
Okay, cryptozoology.
Yeah.
What do y'all know about it?
So this is the Bigfoot, Chupacabra, like it's all the species of animals that are, I swear, out there, but we just don't have any proof of them, right?
And the word itself, cryptozoology, is in crypto meaning like secret or hidden, and then zoology, the study of animals, so the study of secret or hidden animals.
I like it. Way to put a linguistic twist on it. So we're not actually talking about cryptozoology. We're talking about the etymology of the word cryptozoology. Richard Gill, go. For the next hour, it's you.
I don't have my etymological dictionary on me.
Oh, no.
It's not cheated and researched this one like it did the last episode.
Right. But no, this is super fascinating because this is the whole idea that, okay, so we discover new species every day. And cryptozoology is more the idea of the species that we think are out there or that people have reported or talked about, but we don't have any documented proof. Like they're not a well-documented member of the animal kingdom, right? So that's what we mean when we say cryptozoology. So what are some other animals besides Bigfoot and the Chupacabra that you guys can think of?
Well, the thing is for me, cryptozoology is such a wide-ranging spectrum because on one hand, you've got stuff that could legitimately exist, and that is on the edge and maybe exists, and then on the other hand, you've got the extremes like the Loch Ness Monster and the Yeti and Bigfoot and Chupacabra, which means goat sucker, I believe.
Yep.
Brilliant.
Yep. Goat sucker.
What a great name for literally anything. Brilliant.
And what else? The Mongolian death worm. That's my particular favorite cryptozoological little nasty. Yeah, there's lots. What's the Australian one? There's an Australian one whose name eludes me.
I don't.
There's just lots. And it ranges from potentially real creatures to kind of completely mythical creatures, depending on how far down the rabbit hole you want to go with it. It's a fascinating subject. I've been really interested in it for casually for how old am I now? Immensely old. For I'd say a good 24, 25 years. I've like kept my eye on it. I've never deep dived into it, but I've always kept my eye on it and like being interested in it. In the 90s, there was a priest or a vicar in Britain. I think he's dead now. I believe it was called Father Lionel Fanthorpe, but I may be completely wrong on that because I'm going back 20 years of memory here. So,
this is an episode of brilliant names. Just continue.
He was a cryptozoologist as well as being a priest.
That's interesting.
He appeared on some like TV shows back in the night, from what I can remember. Back in the night, I'm surprised I can remember anything from the 90s.
Those are my formative years.
Nice. Yeah, and I did all the things associated with being in a rock and roll band. So the fact that I can remember anything pre-2000 is pretty much a minor miracle in itself. I'm sure he was called Dr. Lionel Fanthorpe. I'll find it out and put it in the discussion group and try and link to some of his stuff. But yeah, it was I enjoyed watching all that stuff back then.
That's interesting because you kind of assume that those two things are believed by separate people. Like the people who are like Goddy and Jesus-y are different to the strange cryptic monster people.
It was a bit of a character from what I recall. He used to walk around with a leather jacket on. I don't know if he was a biker or not. He certainly had that kind of look about him.
That's a priest, a cryptozoologist, and a biker.
He may not have been a biker.
I know, but like even just the fashion sense, like even just the mental picture of that kind of fashion sense, that guy was unique. Reminds me kind of like I always bring him up with Ancient Aliens, the Giorgio Tsoukalos. Like his style is very unique. Yeah, so I don't know. I think that what's most fascinating about it is that element, and this is where me as a skeptic, where it's really fun to talk about cryptozoology, because there is that potential that at least some of the creatures that are discussed within the sort of realms of cryptozoology could very well potentially exist. Like I remember learning about I think it's in Africa that there may be certain types of dinosaurs that still exist, right? Like
Melanatuka. That's another one. That's a Triceratops in Africa.
There you go. Yeah, like the fact that there could still be certain dinosaur species.
I don't know where I plucked that's from 20 odd years ago as well. I just plucked that from thin air. As soon as Laura said that, it just goes.
I know nothing else about what you're talking about, Laura, but I now believe that to be true because I want it to be true.
I love it. Yeah, I love the idea. And there's like a lot of Native American lore that talks about animals that could potentially be like the pterodactyl or other ancient flying animals that
they're just a thunderbird.
Thunderbird, thank you. Yeah, that. Yeah. Which we would think of them as extinct, but then there's a lot of lore that says maybe they're not extinct. And that whole idea of that there could be potentially like giant birds or giant pterodons or pterodactyls still alive today, that is incredibly fascinating.
I mean, when you talk about... Go on, Richard.
I was just going to say, I find it interesting how sort of all of these things come from, usually, if I'm right in understanding, like evidence of varying degrees of reliability and whatever else. So like, I know, for example, we were in Cornwall camping a month back or so, and we visited a small town called Bodmin and the jail there, like a great, like ancient jail that they've got there in Victorian jail and stuff. And they told us stories about the Beast of Bodmin, which was this one where stories started coming in the 1700s in the moorlands all around there. People were found dismembered, and they were like all these like dead bodies around and killings that happened over like a period of time. People found animal prints that they didn't recognize, and it's those sorts of things that then turn in. Like, I guess some of these are like stories like that come. There must be this beast that we don't know about that's sort of around there because we found these things, whereas some of them seem to be more like mythical or legendary almost. I don't know if that makes any sense, but yeah, there are varying degrees of evidence. It's just to what degree you sort of put value in that.
And the stories themselves have varying, even without kind of any evidence as such. There are varying degrees of plausibility, like the Thunderbird. I mean, I've seen, not in real life, but I've seen them on TV next to people, golden eagles and things, and they are big buggers.
Yeah.
and it's not a stretch of the imagination to me that they think that there might be a bird out there which is just a wee bit bigger, but could easily fit the description of the thunderbird. It's apart
That
from
when
causing
flying
thunder
with the right
and things.
Right, so
that's
sort of the compromise, right, between like what's on the animal kingdom's current list and these like cryptozoological explanations, is that there could be that compromise in the middle, like what you're saying, Gilliver, where it's like it's not quite this mythological creature that's exactly described, but it's also a real creature and it really does fit in the animal kingdom, and it's new and it's undocumented, so here it is, right? So it's interesting that like sometimes the truth is there, it's just underwhelming, right?
It's boring world.
It's boring. Once it's documented, now it's boring.
But I think we do have like a standard like list of these are the animals that we know exist. But like, how often do you hear of stories of like deep sea divers who discover these new species that we've never seen or heard of, or
like
species that we don't even believe could have existed, like types of bacteria that exist on like the hot, like the, I can't remember what they're called, but where there's like lava seeping through.
Hydrothermal vents.
That's the one. But like where we think, we previously believed conditions were impossible for life to exist there, but there's this specific bacteria which has adapted perfectly to that. And that sort of stuff happens like all the time where we didn't think it was possible or existed, and now we realize, yeah, it does.
And there was an example of, and I don't remember the name, so don't even ask me to try and remember a certain, I'll probably blurt it out in 20 minutes when someone else is talking, of the fish that was thought to have been extinct like thousands of years ago.
That's the Chimera, right? The Chimera fish.
And it's been kind of rediscovered. When it was
no, I'm sorry, the coelacanth. That's what I mean. I said chimera. It's the coelacanth. Yeah, sorry. I'm like fascinated with that fish. Yeah.
Handy that we have a resident expert for.
No, not an expert. Yeah, no, I'm a homeschool mom, so I learn a little bit of geeky stuff here and there. But
well, I before we go into kind of specifics of things, what I find fascinating about cryptozoology is, if you take, for example, Bigfoot. Now, you've obviously got your crackpot conspiracy theories out there that claim it's like sleeping with him and stuff. But it's genuinely intriguing. I remember I've seen a documentary that took samples. I think they went to the Himalaya and they went to kind of places in the US where they said they had samples of hair and things. And they actually did tests on them. And they came back as bears, in every single case on this documentary. And yet, I've seen an interview with David Attenborough, who's the kind of preeminent zoologist in the world.
David Attenborough,
and he's actually said of all the kind of potential creatures, he thinks Bigfoot is the most likely to exist. And so you've got like these two different extremes from.
But he doesn't say it
authentic
does
positions.
Exist.
No, it doesn't say it does exist.
He says it's the most possible, and I kind of agree with him, like biologically, right? Like you have these examples of all these creatures that are really far-fetched in terms of what their biology is. Like the Chupacabra has got some pretty crazy stuff about him, and like the Loch Ness Monster, right? But Bigfoot, there could be a walking ape that's sort of, it's not quite a gorilla or an ape, and it's not quite a man. It's hairy, and it's able to evade our detection because it's somewhat intelligent. I don't think that Bigfoot necessarily exists, but I kind of get where David Attenborough is coming from, where he's not drawing a hardline conclusion. He's not saying I think Bigfoot exists. He's just saying, based on the frequency of sightings and sort of the way it's described, like, yeah, there could be a creature out there like that.
There's
that
a
exists.
degree of plausibility there, yeah.
There you go. Yeah, it could be a low degree even. But,
yeah.
So let's pick our kind of favorite cryptozoological creature and have a bit of a couple of minutes each on it and get the others' opinions.
That's a lot of pressure. Laura. That's a lot of. That's even more pressure. Laura, let's go
and
first.
Your time starts now.
Now, yeah. So I don't have a specifically favorite cryptozoological animal, but I am most fascinated about the ones like the Loch Ness Monster and like the animals cited in Africa and like Native American lore with the Thunderbird, the ones that like are tied to ancient extinct species that we think are extinct but could still be alive today. And that's why I knew the coelacanth right off the top of my head, right? Is because that is one of those examples where we hadn't spotted any, we didn't have it on record, we didn't have a lot of knowledge about it. And so we assumed based on finding ancient fossils and no living species that had already gone extinct, but it hadn't, right? So you think of like the Loch Ness Monster or the other lakes that have like sightings of lake monsters, and I think 99.999% that it's like a bunch of BS or tricks of the eye or lies or whatever. But the idea that there could be species that we think are extinct that we would have called dinosaurs or whatever, Leviathan or whatever, could still potentially exist out there somewhere.
Yeah, I quite like the things like the Loch Ness Monster, where we have lots of like photographic evidence of things. So, like, I've just googled, like this picture of the Loch Ness Monster.
Photographic
evidence. Already been that's been debunked.
Yeah.
Debunked.
What I like about it is that it's got that sort of that vintage sort of zhuzh about it. That's like, I don't know. You can understand why people would have been maybe convinced by something like that, but then it's turned into this whole thing of basically it's just now a publicity thing for like the Scottish Tourist Board to get people.
Have you ever been to Loch Ness?
No, I've been
all over,
but I've never been there. No.
Nope.
It's very touristy.
Yeah,
I can imagine.
My first encounter with Americans was at Loch Ness, and I've got to say, it wasn't a favourable. It was kind of the, I don't know if you remember the old the Smokey and the Bandit movies. When they kind of had the really big fat Hawaiian shirt, khaki short, cowboy hat wearing Americans who were loud. And,
so stereotypical, yeah.
That was pretty much the visitors centre to Loch Ness. It was fantastic. I thought Americans were like they are in the movies when I first
because of these tourists. Yeah. I mean, stereotypes are there for a reason, right? So you're gonna run into those few every now and again that exactly fit the stereotype.
But on a serious note, it's a big lake. It's a big loch.
Is it the biggest in Scotland?
It's the deepest, I think. I'm not sure if it's the. I think is it.
Perfect for a monster to hide in.
Something like 20 miles long. I'm not sure. It's quite long. There are a series of lochs that go down across Scotland from the west to the east, starting from the northwest. From the east to the west, starting from the northeast and going down into the west. And it's very, very deep. I don't see how, with the amount of people who were there, looking at
there must be eyes on it basically all the time.
There's a castle next to it as well that is open for visitors, and that's literally on the shore. And I don't see how a population, because remember, that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about a creature. I don't see how a population of those things could exist undetected from all those eyes for all that time. It's just that, to me, it's inconceivable. It's like not likely at all.
So I have two things to say about that, and one is that's a really, really good point. When we're talking about cryptozoological creatures or creatures that haven't been documented yet, we're not talking about one Bigfoot, right? Or one Yeti or one Chupacabra. You're right. We're talking about like a group or a species, a population of animals that has not been discovered or documented yet. And yes, there are animals out there, but that we haven't documented yet. But making that distinction that you can't just have one creature that just popped into existence. It is the Loch Ness Monster. And then what, right? Then it like dies and goes away or whatever. So that's point one is, it is really good for us to say we're not talking about a creature, we're talking about a population of creatures. The second is I kind of want to take that and flip it around and to make the same point, but in reverse, right? So the Loch Ness is very, very, very popular because of all the lore and because of how it draws people in, and there's people looking for the monster left and right. So I agree with you. But now we have like the ocean, right? Which is fracking ginormous. And we've only discovered just a small percentage with our little human eyes and even with the instruments that we have to measure things. So think of blue whales, right? Like the only reason we know that blue whales exist is because they surface. And we only
And they're
know
massive.
they're flipping huge. And we only know about them because they have to come up for air. And we've only been able to document there. So I don't know if progress has been made since these documentaries and since these things that I've researched in terms of blue whales. Maybe there's new information out there, but we don't know much about their lifestyle or about their reproduction or about how they live and survive, other than what we can see on them in terms of like tentacles and stuff, like so that we know that they interact with squid. And the fact that we see them on the surface with babies, right? So if you translate that to the depths of the sea, and we know they can survive in incredibly deep water, what about those animals that can survive down there that don't require coming up for oxygen, right? So that just makes the idea that there are animals out there that we have no idea about all the more plausible when it comes to the deep sea, because there aren't all those eyes looking for them all the time, right? And where we are looking, it's like looking through a straw at the universe, right?
It's quite literally a drop in the ocean.
Yeah.
One question that comes to mind with all this, though, is like, why do people give a shit about it as well? like people are determined to find these very specific animals which supposedly do or don't exist. And obviously, if people are wanting to do it through a scientific pursuit of trying to expand humans' knowledge of the biological diversity in the earth, that's one thing. But specifically going after like one individual species,
like just Bigfoot.
Like the Bigfoot enthusiasts, the Bigfoot people. Like, why do they give such? And I don't know if I'm asking you to. It's a question. I'm posing it as a question, but like, why do they give a shit about it? Rich,
It's interesting. I think it's interesting. It's not something I do. Do you remember? And you may not.
I don't mean give a shit about it because our conversation is interesting that we're having about it. Being like people who are just ardently like, yeah, this is the thing, and they're just like crazy into it.
Do you remember Nicholas Witchell, the BBC News reporter?
Not sure.
A ginger guy. I don't know if he was a political correspondent at some point. Might be before your time, youngling. He was a fanatical Loch Ness kind of researcher.
Believer, yeah.
As a believer is probably
or like what Gil said, enthusiast. I like the word enthusiast because it's like
and he was up there all the time looking for Nessie. And I think some people just have pursuits, and some people are afforded the opportunity to pursue those passions. And I think it's one of those things where, in general, as I've said, I've always had like an eye on it, and had a passing interest in it because it is interesting. Now, if you've got nothing else in your life, and you have that interest extended to and kind of funneled to tunnel vision level, I can see
kind of like ghost hunters, huh? Where it's like, why?
Yeah, but even ghost hunters don't spend their entire lives doing it.
Well, I don't think Bigfoot hunters do either. I mean, I don't know.
No, but I guess if you're so far down a rabbit hole being convinced that something exists, and I'm sort of coming to a thought about what I asked both of you, but like there must be a part as well where it must be like, I might be the guy who actually discovers this thing. Like, I'm going to be the person who finds it. I'm going to be the person who
maybe like an Indiana Jones treasure hunter type idea, but with animals. Like I'll get famous off of discovering this one creature. I don't know. I think that those are both very valid potential reasons. I think it would be different for each individual, but I like what Gilliver says about like we just have things that we get fixated on sometimes. And I'm fixated now on like the whole atheism versus religion thing and those discussions, and a lot of people, no, you weren't. But it's a really good question. It's a valid question, but it is interesting what we all as individuals get fixated on, and everyone else looks from the outside and is like, why? Right? Why
Like my
that?
wife when we're having these conversations.
Yeah. But I kind of like the distinction that you made between the people who are fixated on one cryptozoological creature or cryptozoology in and of itself with like the really controversial creatures versus like say a biologist or just a person who's interested in seeking out species in general or examining an area in general and like cataloging the species and what do we know, what don't we know, and what have I personally seen and what can I add to that. That kind of person to me, it's not to disparage the other type, like the interest type, but that person has my respect and my admiration so much more. Like I can understand where that really contributes.
That person usually has a degree or two behind them and funding.
Right. But there's a method
funding because they've written a plan out to get funding, and people have thought that makes sense scientifically rather than funding because someone wants to get rich.
Yeah.
A TV channel throwing money at someone to go and make films about Bigfoot.
Yeah, like one of our favorite places to vacation is Monterey, California, and they have the Monterey Bay Aquarium and stuff. What a lot of people don't know about the aquarium is there's a lot of scientists and initiatives behind it. Like the aquarium funds a lot of like ocean research and research into these creatures and stuff like that. Even just within the bay, the Monterey Bay, but also like it funds research wider. And I think that's fascinating. I think that's absolutely freaking cool because they're taking in information. They're not like laser focused on like, oh, this could potentially be Bigfoot, and I'm gonna look for just Bigfoot. And these signs that are actually bear signs could potentially be Bigfoot signs, right? They're more like, I'm gonna capture all of this and I'm gonna collect it and see what we can make out of it, you know.
And your example there, I think, really highlights as well the point you made before in terms of the amount of the world that we don't yet know, because actually just in that one bay there will be so much to see and find and explore just in that one very small place in that, you know, it's just vast. And it does make you wonder, doesn't it, like, will we ever know everything that there is in the earth? Will there always be some mysteries of things out there? And I guess that adds to the awe and wonder around this sort of topic generally.
Yeah, and it is an amazing topic when you look at it from the kind of what's the technical animal science?
I keep saying remember. Biology or zoology.
That's the one, biology. That's the one I was thinking of. When you look at it from the kind of biological angle and the fact that there are so many new species potentially to be discovered, most of them probably about this big, and if they're in Brazil, could probably kill you with a single bite.
or Australia. Australia is out to kill you in terms of poison.
But Australia's got its fair share of big cryptozoological creatures as well. There's the one whose name I couldn't remember earlier, but there's also kind of the more mythical things like the bunyip, which come from the kind of Aboriginal stories.
So we almost need to do these like back to back or tie them together. The difference between cryptozoology and mythology, right? Mythological creatures versus cryptozoological creatures, because there is some overlap,
some crossover,
yeah. But I think that'd be great for getting into after our commercial break. Like I think this would be a good time to break for commercial and then get into that.
Okay. So, yesterday, I was on Friend of the Show, and Laura's been on this show as well. It's been my second appearance on it, the Bloody Good Film Podcast.
Yes!
And Josh and Jesse were great guys. They're really fun. As Laura knows, when you're just chatting away to them doing the podcast.
I love it. Yeah, we've talked about having me on again, and I'm really excited. I'm not scheduled yet, but I'm excited.
They'd asked me on, but they kind of nothing was planned, and then Jesse got sick, so kind of Josh sent me a message out of the blue saying, "No, you're free. We kind of need someone to jump in," and I know nothing about movies. So we
Perfect.
could we
Just like we know nothing
like-
about our topics.
I was literally going to say.
so we did I'll not give any spoilers if you've not listened to the podcast yet. It came out yesterday, but if you've not listened to it, it's about, what film is it about? They Live, with the Rowdy Roddy Piper, the ex-wrestler. So we got into a little bit of my background as an ex-wrestler, and I did a little bit of that just for a few minutes. So we had a good time. It's just me and Josh. Josh is a really good friend of mine. Just chit chatting away. So it was really good fun. Laura, I'm assuming you've got the non-profits coming up this Sunday, I believe.
I love the time travel aspect of this bit of the show where we have to work out.
I know,
where we
he
are in
keeps
time.
track of all of it. I know, because we record these weeks previous and we kind of keep track of the schedule, and I've lost it, but Gilliver's got it. He's all over it, like white on rice. I love it.
So let's talk about Mr. Gill, our wonderful Facebook discussion group.
In fact, I'm going to correct you there and replace the word wonderful with shit hot.
Yes.
It's the place for conversation, discussion, elaboration and correction, as well as Gilliver's list of links with like basically every episode for like actual knowledge about things.
I love that he actually follows up with it too. That's fantastic.
As opposed to you two just say that you will do and then never.
I love making empty promises. It's like my thing.
So yes, if you're not there already, please bob on over there. It's lovely people, and you can find the link to that and all of our other outlets at linktr.ee/skeptic hangout.
And it's episodes like this one about cryptozoology that so we get some like out of the blue conversations coming out there as well, because there are people out there who know far more than we do about it.
No, but interestingly, I think it was over the last week or two, I saw someone who commented on our YouTube video of the flat Earth conversation that we had, sort of basically saying that it was a bad conversation because none of us believe in flat Earth. And obviously that's kind of the point of our show.
Yeah.
We are skeptics about all these things. But I thought it reminded me of like actually a variety of voices about stuff is good. And if people do have things to argue against the things we've said, like I really love to engage in that sort of conversation.
Yeah, I was going to say that's
it really loves to engage in that conversation, but it's always me who does the arguing.
I mean, there's a place for argument, so let's not treat argument like it's all that bad. Like it's great to do discussions. I think discussions are more productive. But
did I say because I meant
no, Gilliver did. Gilliver said something about about like it turns into arguments or something like that. But yeah, arguments are good. Okay, so I think that was the most interesting and dysfunctional commercial break that we've ever had. But welcome back, everybody. If you survived that commercial break and you're still here, you are so appreciated. And thank you so much. Not that you were appreciated if you didn't make it through it, but okay, so you're appreciated no matter what. Okay, so when we went to commercial break, we were talking about the difference between cryptozoological creatures and mythological creatures and how there's potentially a lot of overlap there. So I kind of wanted to give a shout out, and this is like not anybody I've ever worked with. I don't know her. This is one of our things that we geek out to, me and the kids with our home learning. But there's a woman who does a YouTube channel called Storied, and it used to be called Monstrum. So you can search for it with either word and it'll come up. But she does breakdowns of both, and it's so flipping awesome. And she'll tell the history of them and what's known about them and not known about them. And so we'll geek out when we're kind of like bored or in the car driving or need something to listen to. Geek out to her stuff, like whether it's mythological or cryptozoological or a little bit of both. So I just wanted to like insert that plug, just because I like her stuff.
So on the aspect of not going off the cryptozoological too much, but on the just out of curiosity and just for a little bit of fun, if there was one
I always
mythological,
get scared when he says that, Laura, don't you?
Say what?
I always get scared when he says that.
I know. You're about to be interrogated. Hold on to your seats.
If there was one mythological creature that you wish was real for whatever reason, what would it be and why? Richard, we'll start with you this week because I picked on Laura last week.
You did. Yes, interesting because like some of them that we talk about are specific. Like I talked about the Beast of Bodmin as an example of where people got murdered and whatever else, like ripped apart on the moors. Some of them like you wouldn't want to, but some of them just seem to be just happily existing and not really paying any attention to anybody. I mean, I guess I don't have a wide knowledge of different examples of cryptozoological creatures, like very honestly. And so I'm going to wait until Laura has answered to give you a better answer.
So I need clarification. You said mythological, right? Not
mythological, not
okay,
cryptozoological.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
okay.
we
Sorry,
did
I was
we did
thinking
the
of a
crypto
different
already.
question.
Well, we did the crypto
right.
one earlier, yeah. And mythological, that's still a good question too. So okay, so I have this thing. Like my kids will ask me, like, Mom, what's your favorite this? What's your favorite color? What's your favorite ice cream? What's your favorite song? And I always tell them, like, dude, I don't have favorites, so stop asking me that question. Like, you should just stop asking me what's your favorite of anything. Because there's like, oh, this specific instance, this thing, and then in this specific instance, that thing. Or it's according to my mood. And I think that would be the same with mythological creatures. Like, whichever one comes to my head first, is that necessarily my favorite? And if so, why? Or is it gonna be different tomorrow? So I don't know. Like there's mythological creatures that I find really, really fascinating. Like the ones that like the phoenix, for example, is one that I think is really, really cool. The idea that you could be destroyed and then reborn from the ashes of your destruction, like that is just really,
It's
really
a really
cool.
satisfying, pleasing concept, isn't it?
Yeah, that sort of that the circle of life is also intrinsic to individuals, not just like the idea of having a life cycle, but of it
And
coming
it has a
full circle
parallel
to rebirth.
in actual zoology with the hydrozoa jellyfish, which
Yes,
is the
that is so
only creature that
fascinating.
can return to the first stage of life and is essentially immortal.
Yeah,
If it doesn't get eaten.
Right. There's no like specific death in that cycle. Yeah,
Yeah.
that is really, really, really fascinating to me. And the axolotl where it can regrow limbs, love it. That's like one of my favorite creatures. One of, see, because I just don't have one. But yeah, I like the phoenix idea. And then I like the idea of things that are mixed or like like the whole chimera concept of what are they, like the griffin, right? Or creatures, what is the one that's like half man, half goat, or half man, half horse is a centaur.
Fawn or a
Centaurs.
So
centaur.
the goat is a what?
Fawn.
A fawn, yeah, fawn, centaurs, those
And
kinds of
Mr.
things.
Tumnus.
Yeah, Tumnus, yeah, I love him. He's such a gentleman. But yeah, I like that kind of idea of like the blending of the different animal characteristics.
Mythological creatures for me, I guess, thinking about it just now, reflecting on it, is lots of the sort of Northern European folky sort of stuff, like elves and gnomes and those sorts of things, for no specific reason, but they just seem to be relatively nice and harmless and pretty.
I do sort of have a thing for fairies, but that's more of like artistically pleasing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you seen the movie Troll Hunter?
Yeah.
I think they call it Troll Hunter. That is an amazing I love that film. Have you not seen it, Richard? Go and watch it if you've not seen it. It's really good.
The graphics are really cool. Yeah.
I as you two have been talking, I've literally changed my mind 3 times.
That's awesome. That's why I don't pick favorites.
I started off with kind of the centaur on the just the basis of having a conversation with one. Then I kind of went to dragon.
Oh, I like dragons.
And the whole kind of thing from the eastern dragon to the
western dragon.
All while you've been discussing it, and I've settled finally, I think, on probably because I'm a Celtic person. The elves, the imps, the little shits that play tricks with you, and
that's your favorite. Your favorite creature is the little shit that plays tricks on you. I love those little buggers.
The thing is that we the Scottish form of the she means peep of the hills in Gaelic, as in banshee. Banshee literally means woman of the people. Ban is Gaelic for woman. So Banshee is literally woman of the people of the hills. And we call my daughter the Banshee because when she was born for the first 6 months, she screamed to like ears splittingly, horrible screams. So she's kind of picked up the nickname of the Banshee because of that. But also the Scottish form of the word she is Sith, which I'm sure most people will be very familiar with Star Wars. And that's the Scottish form of she. So I'll just love the whole concept, and they are little shits. The in folklore, they're not the nice little elves of kind of Tolkien-esque.
Well, and Tolkien elves aren't even little; they're human-sized. I mean, that is interesting how creatures can be like depending on the culture they can be described so differently from culture to culture. But now we're getting down into mythology and we're getting away from cryptozoology.
Yeah. Let's get back.
But let's go with your whole elves thing, like the creatures. Do they have any place in cryptozoology? Like
but I guess there was the thing in Victorian times, wasn't there, about the people had the photos of the fairies and stuff. I think we have referenced that before. But like that kind of bridges that gap between like people who just had like stories and folk tales about it to then people having this sort of questionable evidence about something.
But people genuinely believed it. There's a guy, I don't know his name, and I occasionally, it's one of those YouTube channels that I come across every so often. Don't particularly watch it, but it keeps like popping up, and it's this guy and it's clearly fake, but it's the bearded guy somewhere in England who takes his camera into the woods and films fairies and or elves or whatever it is they're supposed to be. And you see these little computer generated things running across the hills.
So as a skeptic, is that...
But there are so many people who follow his
believe
channel.
It. Yeah.
Who believe it.
So as a skeptic, does that kind of piss you off a little bit at all? Like the idea that like it's already hard enough to determine truth from untruth and stuff, but then you have people who are like sort of deliberately putting stuff out there that muddy the water.
I'm in two minds about it, and I'll tell you why I'm in two minds about it. The guy seems a really lovely, soft-spoken, gentle guy who's doing his thing, and I've no problem with that. The problem is that there are gullible people out there who believe it, and that's where the danger arises. Because where we've spoken so many times on this show, if you are prone to bad thinking, it's not limited to one area of your life.
Right.
And the people who are going to fall for that are going to fall for vaccine misinformation. They're going to put people's lives at risk by not getting a vaccine. They're going to fall for con men who are trying to screw money out of them. Bad thinking is bad thinking. And if you can't guard against it in one area, you're susceptible
in others.
You're susceptible.
That's a good point.
I wanted to make that clear that you are susceptible, not that you are guaranteed. It's not a case that if you fall for bad thinking in what you are absolutely guaranteed and you're stupid and you're going to. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is if you don't have those tools to assess a situation, you're not going to have those tools in another situation, and you are more susceptible.
Tools,
no.
And so instances like that really make cryptozoology even more complicated and muddied, because now you don't just have like so you have fantasy or lore or mythology that we've all kind of sort of agreed is not true. It's a book or a collection of stories, and then you have the people who take those characters and they kind of work them into our reality, or can they really exist, right? And so that's where you really have like this, like I understand like the Chupacabra, for example. It's like, okay, we have these events that are happening down in Mexico and in Southern America and stuff. And we're trying to come up with an explanation, and like dogs with mange, I think right now is the best explanation. But
I'm glad you brought Chupacabra because I want to return to that shortly.
Yeah.
Carry on.
Okay. So, but there's sort of a basis, like, okay, we have these events happening and these sightings and we don't really understand them. And so we create this lore around them, but there's this like real world basis for them. Then you have the opposite happening where it's like, okay, we have these mythological creatures we're going to try and figure out or see if there are ways in which they could actually work into our reality, and could they actually exist. And so we start inventing these ways in which they could exist. And so I think it adds this other layer of complexity to cryptozoology, where now we're just wanting things to be real, or seeing if we can come up with ways to trick people to convince them that they're real. And but there isn't that sort of real world basis until after the fact, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, we're just jumping back to what Richard said earlier, and I may have got this wrong. Were the fairies photographed the Cottingley fairies? Is
Yes.
that what? Is
Yeah,
that the
that's
name?
what I was referring to. Yeah.
I couldn't remember the name. I knew it was something like, I was thinking Notting Hill at first, because it sounds a bit like Cottingley, and I had the kind of the rhythm in my head, but I wasn't sure of it. So it was the Cottingley fairies.
Yeah, Cottingley fairies, because they were in
3 sisters.
Yeah,
And they took
so
the
they
pictures.
were Elsie Wright and Francis Griffiths. They were cousins.
Right.
Yeah, near Bradford in England in 1917. But yeah, they were. I'll just show on there. So that's like you can't see it very well, but they were like composite pictures.
I
obviously
will
wasn't
link in the discussion group.
There we go.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I'll write down to do a link of that one. But the idea is that, like, at the time with photography being so new, those pictures were actually quite impressive. Like how they were able to pull them off was quite impressive.
Yeah, certainly. And it is that thing of like, where do you draw the line of things being good evidence for something? And that's always the question, I guess, when we're looking at these things skeptically. It's like I've never seen loads of animals in the flesh before, but I believe that they exist because I've been taught they exist in school, and I might have seen information about them online or whatever. But like, at what point do I trust or believe that something exists, and where does that line, like, why do I not believe that those fairies exist, but I do believe that, I don't know, I've never seen a blue whale, so like, but I've no reason to believe they don't exist. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's that question all the time.
It's applied skepticism, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
There is no reason to think a blue whale doesn't exist. I've seen the skeleton of a blue whale.
And there's ways that you can, like, you can take steps to sort of verify that. Like, you can go on like whale watching trips, or you can do the research yourself, or you can become one of those, like, if you can say, like, I don't understand physics, sure, but you have the opportunity to try and become a what would a physics person be?
Physicist.
Physics, because I kept wanting to say physician, and I was like, that's wrong. A physicist. There you go. Like, you can take those steps to verify or validate that information, if that's a desire or a passion of yours. Whereas with some of these mythological creatures, like, how do you even approach validating it? Like, people have approached faking it. People have approached convincing others, but there's not really a really hard set way to validate them.
And that sort of goes into that conspiracy thinking as well sometimes, of like, well, the sort of like accepted scientists in various fields haven't, validated these things, or, they're not mentioned in journals, they're not mentioned in the textbooks or whatever, because they've been kept out of those textbooks, and because they're not talking about, like, and you can then enter that conspiratorial sort of mindset in it as well.
Yeah, or you
go on, Laura.
I was gonna say, or you could do it the other way around, like, where it's like, because scientists haven't validated it, therefore it's absolutely false, and that could be wrong too, right? Because it could turn out that animal X actually really does exist. There's just not enough documentation yet, right?
Yeah.
I want to talk briefly, if it's okay with you guys, about the Chupacabra, because that's interesting to me, because unlike things like the Mongolian deathworm or the Yeti or Sasquatch,
tell me
things
super
like
quick.
That,
Tell me super quick about the Mongolian deathworm, though. I've never heard of that.
I'm imagining, that scene in Star Wars where
with like, the big thing with the teeth.
It's essentially, according to the folklore of the region, a worm-like thing, which is actually electrified and lives under the sands of the Mongolian desert. Like an electric eel, but it lives under the sand, and it's actually been reported to have killed horses and things when they've stepped on it and it's applied the electric shock. So that's the Mongolian deathworm in a nutshell.
Again, that seems feasible to me. Why not?
The thing is, it's
I have
reasonably
questions.
feasible.
Yeah.
I have questions, but we know that animals do have electric charges in them.
Sure, yeah.
You know,
and we know that things burrow under the sand.
Yeah. It's not out of the question. It's one of those which is like very much like Sasquatch, that it potentially could be. And it's one of those that's like grown up in the region and the stories around it for like, you know, decades and decades. So it's unlike the Chupacabra.
Is this the goat sucker?
This is a goat sucker.
Right, I don't think I know anything about this, so I'm intrigued.
Right. It's either originated. I was around and like looking at cryptozoological stuff when this first got reported, which I think was either the early or the mid 90s. I don't remember which. And I think it was either, because these places are both very exotic to me, so I could have probably misremembered them. It was either Puerto Rico or Costa Rica. I want to say Puerto Rico.
See, I want to say Puerto Rico. That's what my brain goes to, but I don't want to make any sort of determination either because I'll be wrong.
I'm not sure, but I think it was Puerto Rico where it was first reported to have come out and essentially killed goats and sucked the blood out of them, hence goat sucker. There were lots of stories at the time of around the first few sightings that I think there was a US air base or a US army base on the island, and there was this kind of mythology that grew up around it about it being an alien hybrid.
Oh, interesting. See, I hadn't heard that. That's cool.
And taken either created at the base or being captured and taken to the base and escaped. I don't remember the exact details of the thing. And there were a few isolated incidents and this legend grew up around it. And then it kind of started spreading to Mexico.
Mm-hmm. And South America.
And then you got all these reports of cattle. I'm not sure if the cattle reports came previous to that and then were associated with it afterwards.
Are they not just sucking goats now?
I don't know. So that's interesting to me because I heard it as two separate. Yeah, I think
go on.
I was just gonna say that just goes to show how stories can circulate differently among different demographics, right? Because I'd always heard those two, the instances with the cows as being more aliens and not so much Chupacabra, and the goat mutilations as being specifically Chupacabra and not aliens. But I've always heard them as two separate phenomena. So it's interesting that you.
Yeah, I've certainly heard reports that the cow mutilations were by the Chupacabra as well. And that relates back to it being an alien hybrid. And
see, it all
probably
comes full
where
circle.
The alien connection comes in. So it's a fascinating, and it's been, as I said, I've never deep dived into any of this stuff, but over the years, watching that story develop, I remember when the first cases came out on Puerto Rico, and the kind of whole thing about the isolated. And I remember a magazine article where people went looking for it in this cave system, and there were weird goings off in there, but they never quite captured anything. And to the whole
thing,
with
cases like that, I can see the motives there. Like if you're a goat herder who has had goats mutilated, you would want to find the thing that did that, wouldn't you?
Right.
You know, like there's a real life implication to that creature or that thing, the cause of those things happening. And there's a real life implication of all that.
And the place at the time, I think, if I remember rightly, was having a spate of kind of UFO incidents as well. So you can see where the mythology connections get made. So, and it's interesting to have watched that story develop over the past, how many years it is, 27 years that it's been going, and kind of taking on a new lease of life. And as Laura said, these things are now spread throughout South America, where they were originally just isolated incidents in on this one isolated island.
Yeah, it's interesting how like stories take on their own shape once people start hearing about them, because I think what originally happened was you have the original reports and then you have other people who see stuff and like they can't explain it and they start tying it together. And so the most scientific approaches that I've seen, like the most investigative documentaries that I've seen on Chupacabra, talk about like, okay, so people have things like animal mutilations and they can't explain them. And they also have sightings of animals, and they look just horrific and get compared to like the descriptions of the Chupacabra. And so what I've heard as the most likely example of what it actually is like the wild dogs with mange, and they have these pictures of actual like, hey, this is an actual sighting of an actual Chupacabra, and they analyze the picture, and it's like, oh yeah, well, a person who doesn't study zoology or biology might not even know what these different dogs look like when they're suffering from mange, because they look pretty freaking scary, right? Like it looks pretty bad. And the skin takes on the same sort of like aspects that the Chupacabra, like the descriptions of Chupacabra, take on. So, yeah, that one's interesting to me because that one's one of those cases where there is a lot of lore around it. And there's also a lot of like sort of harder scientific data there. And that data is more against the idea of it being a Chupacabra, but there's actually like a lot of information there with some of these sightings. You know what I'm saying?
If you ever noticed me looking down, by the way, during this episode, I'm just opening new tabs on my phone for things to Google once I finish talking. So I've just added a few there.
So what I wanted to do really quickly before we end, because I know we're coming up on the end here any minute now. There are a lot of really, really, really interesting creatures that really do exist. I know we mentioned it earlier in the episode, but I thought that was something cool to kind of come back around to and like talk about really quickly. Because I have a few that are like my favorites that are like you wouldn't have thought that they actually exist, but they do. The axolotl that I mentioned earlier being one of them. Like that little guy is just fascinating. But there's a squid that I love like researching, and the kids and I like watching videos on, but it's called a Magnapina squid, and it was only recently discovered. I don't remember like how long ago, but within the last few decades, the last like 2 or 3 decades. And they used to call it the alien squid before it was like known, and it was captured first accidentally on like an underwater camera, and it wasn't expected. It just came onto the camera and people started flipping out about it and calling it like an alien squid, and it's scary looking. But now it's better documented. Did you just look it up?
Now.
If you search for alien, I'll put a link in the description of a video of this thing. But if you search for just alien squid, since Magnapina is somewhat complicated to spell, it comes up really easily. But yeah, complete cryptozoological creature right there, and it actually exists. So what do you guys think? What are some creatures that you guys can think of that actually exist that you think are just out there?
I still can't believe that humans exist. What a wacky idea that is. Sorry, Philip, you
bald primates.
Yeah.
I think this is going to sound really strange because it's not peculiar or out there at all to us now. But I was at the Yorkshire Wildlife Park not so long ago.
Love it there.
It's a great place. And I was fascinated by the giraffes because they are the strangest looking fucking things. Yeah. They just, I mean, we kind of take them for granted because we know all the African animals and that. But if you ever just sit and observe it in person, if you ever get the opportunity to sit and look at a giraffe, they are so bizarre. They're just like, they are literally like nothing else on earth.
So think about, go ahead.
They just fascinate me. I just find them, the whole body structure, the size, everything about them is just, they're like, I can see how they're related to other creatures like cows and things. And, you know, with the kind of face shape and the tongues and the structure of their head. But the whole thing is just so alien. If you just sit and observe them.
I heard a thing about how, and this is a joke, but how giraffes are basically nearly permanently sexually aroused. And for the brief moments where they're not, they just look like horses. It's just like a very long erect head.
So imagine before like people came across so say Europeans, for example, coming into Africa for the first time, and they've been geographically separated, and they're not familiar with the flora and fauna of Africa, and they first come across a giraffe. Like that, you're right. That is a cryptozoological experience right there, right? Like that's something that's so completely bizarre and alien and outside of what you're used to. Seeing something like that, or like a rhinoceros or an elephant, right, for the first time, having not heard of them in a book or not been taught about them in school, to just stumble across an animal like that has to be just an absolutely otherworldly, bizarre experience.
Giraffes are one of those as well where they're actually bigger than you feel like they ought to be.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
they are large.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Gil, what about you?
I found that with a lot of African animals, actually. The in person, they're a lot bigger. I remember seeing a lion for the first time in person, and I was like, I don't like these things. These are too big for my liking, and the teeth are far too big, and I can't run fast enough.
That shouldn't be okay. Who approved this animal?
Yeah, a sort of group of animals that I find really interesting. I don't know lots about, but need to learn more about is jellyfish generally, because they don't work in the same way as other animals, and in some ways they kind of don't work like animals are supposed to. Like they don't have brains, but they kind of, I don't know, they're just fascinating because they're like there's just nothing to them, but there's also lots to them, and they like can kill people, but they also kind of they're just like mystical to me. Like I don't even believe that it might all be a hoax. Who knows? But
I've seen them in real life. They're real.
Yeah. Okay.
So okay, so you just made me think of, I don't know why you made me think of this, but like sea creatures are just fascinating in general. But siphonophores, have you guys heard of siphonophores?
No.
It's like it's a creature, but it's not. It presents as an individual creature, like it moves and it's got structure and it's all stuck together. But when they've studied it, they've actually found that it's a colony of creatures, and they're like these specialized cells, and so each creature does its own little part, but it works together as a single animal. And so it's almost like how we have cells in the body are specialized, but then we're a single creature. These creatures are specialized, and they create this colony, and they're massive. Well, they can get massive. They can also be small, and they work together to create like this. It looks like a creature, like so siphonophores, like the fact that these kinds of things, like they're so different.
That sounds scary. That sounds like the stuff of nightmares.
Oh, it's because he mentioned jellyfish and how fascinating jellyfish are. It made me think of it. Yeah, like they look like jellyfish type creatures, but they're actually colonies of creatures. It's freaking amazing.
That's interesting. I've opened a new tab. I'm
going
to be reading all my
siphonophore. Yeah. Don't even get me started about tardigrades. No, okay. So we're right up at the end of the episode. So why don't you guys? I think I'll
you don't want to see a tardigrade going backwards, because it's not worse than a tardigrade in retrograde.
Oh my god! insert dad joke here. Okay, so I'm going to use the siphonophores as my closing thing. Like I just the idea that there are fascinating things out there that we know that do exist is enough for me, right? And as we discover more of them, great, fascinating. And until then, I don't care as much about the creatures that we haven't discovered that we think might be real. What about you guys? What are your closing thoughts?
My closing thought is that I think sometimes, and this is true of most humans, I believe, that like the sort of wanting something to be real can sometimes cloud our judgment of like whether or not something is actually real. And I think it's always a good opportunity for us to, like we're saying in the ending, interrogate your beliefs. And if you do have a belief in something like this, I'm not saying you're wrong, because I probably know less about it than someone who is really into this does. But like, are you believing that things are real because you want them to be, or is it because you actually have good reason to? And that's with everything, but it works with what we've been talking about.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating subject altogether, and it's such a wide. I mean, we've talked about the crossover between mythological creatures, about genuine biology, It's such a wide-ranging subject that
Totally.
it's one of those things that I think will forever hold the human imagination, because there's always going to be stuff out there to discover, and there's always as long as we inhabit the earth and there's relatively unexplored areas or potential areas where things could be. I think there's always going to be that what if question.
I like that. Yeah, I like that. So, if you audience have any creature, real or imagined, that you're passionate about, and let us know which it is. Is it mythological? Is it cryptozoological? Is it actually biological? In which case, I want the links because I want to learn more about it. Let us know what it is, and put some links on the Facebook page that we can go check out and explore these different kinds of creatures and maybe have some discussions about. But also, anything that you guys can think of in terms of cryptozoology, in terms of your own experiences, or what your own thoughts are. Do you think Bigfoot exists? Do you think Loch Ness Monster exists? I want to hear about that too. All right, having said that, thank you guys for watching, and we will see you next time. In the meantime, I am Laura.
Richard.
And Richard, and you've been watching Skeptic Hangout.
Keep questioning.
Jill, I forgot his thing.
He's every week now. It's getting worse and worse.
I'm the oldest of us, so.
And he's losing it.
My mind's. I've remembered Father Lionel Fanthorpe's name. I'll have you know that's from a long time ago.
Gold star for that. Gold star
power.
For that. Yeah.
I'm not expected to remember the catchphrase we do every single week on top of that.
I think it's because our schedules got so thrown off, like with us, like all
grey in my beard. Look.
Yep. You got old man syndrome. All right,
keep
people.
Questioning, interrogate your beliefs, and stay skeptical. That'll do.
Yep, and we will see you next time. Goodbye.